So, I'm just kind of like floored right now. When I saw our residency saying, you're going to be in a scientific lab, and they're doing research into the mating songs and dances of the Japanese Rhino Beetle, I was like, please pick me, please pick me, please pick me. This is a dream come true. So you're about to go on an epic journey of beetle courtship.
Let's see, a rhinoceros beetle is
big, charismatic.
At minimum, the size of a chicken's egg. That's how long they are. Honestly, that's how heavy and wide they are also.
Kind of roughly the size of a thumb, except fatter, and they're very shiny.
Shiny, kind of a cat's paw situation coming out of its head in an ornamental way.
All brown, and then their distinguishing feature is that they have a large pitchfork-shaped horn coming off their head, and it's that pitchfork that makes them different from all the other rhinoceros beetles.
They use their horns to battle each other in these really epic battles where they try and pry each other off the tree so they can mate with the lady rhino beetle.
Musical sex machine. I mean, I was really captivated by the large appendage on the front that protrudes as a weapon that seems utterly useless and hard to have snacks or scratch anywhere. But that seems like a dominant feature. You just gotta look it up.
Yes, right there. It is field night 24 at 2022-48. This is PT 12, and we're witnessing the male 355? Is that 365? I have been studying the Japanese rhinoceros beetle and their strange and interesting mating behaviors. So I am a graduate student at the University of Montana, now a PhD candidate this year, very exciting. And I'm getting my doctorate in evolutionary biology. The males that have the weapons will fight each other on the sides of little feeding sap territories that they feed on in order to exclude rivals from potential mates that are also feeding at the same territories. Normally, when species evolve weapons like that, they don't often evolve other things to go with it. So we don't really see elk doing a rut and then also doing a dance and a song after they do that. So it's normally a one or the other type situation. These beetles actually make a little sound that is very much a courtship song. It happens all before mating and after they fight. And basically, a big part of my project is trying to remedy that interesting question of why have both of these tactics evolved in this species?
Ouch, that really hurts. All right, we study the beetles because of this. In my lab, we study animal extremes. I'm Doug Emlen. I'm an evolutionary biologist at the University of Montana. I'm holding and being pinched by the stag beetle. The males have mouth parts that have been hugely elongated so that they serve, as surprisingly strong and effective pincers that they can use in battles where they squeeze rival males over access to feeding sites and ultimately access to females. The other group of beetles, the ones that we actually spend most of our time working on, are what are known as the rhinoceros beetles. These are also very large beetles. This is actually a relatively small male from one of these species. In this case, instead of being mouth parts, the weapons are horns. So they're projectile protrusions that come off of the equivalent of the shoulder blades or the back of the head or the front of the head. And the males can use these weapons also in sparring and jousting battles with rival males over access to females. Okay.
The courtship aspect of the rhinoceros beetles was really fascinating to me because you don't really get a sense for that in insects. Usually you don't really think about them like courting each other. It's just kind of mating. Does it happen? Yes or no? But with the rhinoceros beetles, there's this whole kind of mysterious process. As far as we know, they are the only beetle that performs this kind of courtship that we're seeing, this what we call the song and what we call the dance. And we haven't observed that in other rhinoceros beetles so far, to my understanding.
You're in the summer, you're standing in the middle of a forested area in Japan. You will probably find Japanese rhinoceros beetles. They aggregate in mass, so that's step number one. All adults will find each other on a handful of trees within the area.
So a night in the life of the beetles, imagine, as the sun goes down at dusk, there are trees that are oozing sap. The first beetles that come in, drawn by the smell of the oozing sap and find it, essentially send out a beacon. They release a chemical, a pheromone, that disperses into the area. It's an aggregation pheromone, and all the males and female beetles are attracted to it. So over the course of the night, you can end up with several hundred beetles all clambering around on the sides of a couple trees, all fighting for access to these feeding sites.
And males will battle out almost like a dominance hierarchy for who's going to retain control over a little feeding territory on the side of a tree that's leaking sap. But after fighting, the male then approaches the female, and they recognize them through pheromones. And the male will climb on the female's back and then start by doing a really intensive trembling dance. So they shake their abdomens very vigorously, and that's kind of kicking off the cycle. That then leads into what we've been calling song A, where they will move their abdomens up and down, and it makes a little squeaky sound that's like, and then that then feeds into song B, which is a side-to-side motion, and they make a little sound. So it sounds very different, the two types of song, and then that go into that tremble again, and then that cycle repeats over and over and over again until the female accepts mating. So it can last. I mean, we've seen males court for 3 hours before. So they put all their effort into it.
My name is Stony Samso. I am the executive director and co-founder of an organization called Open Air. And a big part of what we do is collaborative, place-based art making. One of the core thoughts that we have is artists are keystone species of a healthy human ecology. And within an ecosystem approach, there are certain priorities that we bring forward. So collaboration, diversity, synergy are all elements that we're looking for to bring communities together, artists together, and partnerships together to create this beautiful overlap. We hope for communities to come into contact with creative works, with new entities in our communities that are doing impactful and meaningful work. We hope for community partners to discover new things about what they do through the arts. And we hope our partners get benefit by bringing new community members in to learn about what they're up to. So Jessi and Julynn's project is an absolute example of what we hope might come from a residency. It's important for us that artists find their own path naturally, but there's of course a synergy between composition and dance that we weren't naive to when we brought them together. And the fact that there was an enthusiasm on their side to continue working after the residency, and such enthusiasm from Doug's team to bring them into the fold and show them all things bug related. It's what you hope for with a collaboration and residency project. Yeah.
I don't know that many scientists that work with choreographers or work with dancers. It's a really unusual way to try to bridge that gap, but it's been amazing. You're going to hear more about both of them in a minute. Awesome to work with people that talented and that interested in learning about beetles and about science and about biology, and then bring that together into a collaborative effort has been great. Perseverance and commitment and a lot of passion has kept this thing moving forward, and I hope you like what you see today.
This is a really incredible moment to see all of this work come together. I mean, I spent a lot of time with Julynn and Jessi back in the lab in 2022. And so I'm just really, really excited.
We were only planning on one artist at Doug's lab. And then we got applications from Jessi Harvey, Julynn Wildman, and we said, we can't just have one. How do we just have one? We have to have them both. Let us have them both. And so that's what we did. We invited both artists to be in residence with Doug in the summer of 2022. They came in as independent entities, Julynn is a dancer, Jessi a composer, and their time together naturally led to something a little more. And I have been in just complete admiration of their dedication to this project and continuing collaboration. It's not easy. So as a supporting organization, we love to work with committed, disciplined artists and are so thrilled to be here today and see the performance that y'all have in store for us.
If you don't know me, my name is Jessi. I also go by George, and I'm a composer. I grew up about 30 miles west of here in the 6 Mile Valley, and it was like so thrilling to come back home and do what I do, which is write music. For me, it's always about learning. I love to learn stuff. I am a giant nerd. I love to read. I love to discover things. So this opportunity where we've been able to actually talk with scientists doing the research, be able to get all of their scientific papers that they're reading and creating, all of their data taken from the field, all of their experimental data, being able to listen to that, then like the wonderful part about a more long-term collaboration is being able to see what discoveries they make. Pretty much every note, every idea in my piece is based on some sort of research. Over time, as we rehearsed together, we were able to dive much more in depth about the specifics of the piece. And it was very, very rewarding because they got very into it. And so they were asking what their roles were in specific places. Am I a beetle or am I like nature sounds? I was actually able to show like footage of the beetles in the wild. So that just gave another kind of access point for them to learn about this crazy song that we're rehearsing.
Remember to intimidate each other if you have downtime. So I like to work in a workshop format where I get to communicate directly with the dancers and give them my choreography and give them my rendition of what is going on in the research, but also give them the background of how I got to that and ask them to create their own movements and interpretations of the research. It's really interesting to kind of see the individual interpretations of what that means and then to put that all together in a cohesive way that reflects what's been found out at the lab. The second thing that really intrigued me was just how different insects move. Instead of thinking about working in two sections of body like our upper and lower body, insects have their head and their thorax and their abdomen. And then they've got 6 legs, so if you think about like moving a fore and a hind limb, but then also a middle limb, like how does that work? And then the difference of working with an endoskeleton and all of like the leverage of our muscles versus how would you move if you were contained in an exoskeleton and all of the muscular effort was just from like pressure differentials. So some of the elements of the research from the lab that I've been working with are the mechanics of stridulation.
Stridulation is when the beetles rub 2 body parts together. So in this case, it's a wing cover, the elytra rubbing against a rigid part of the abdomen, and it creates a vibration that we hear as an audible sound.
So movement that takes inspiration from those mechanics it's been challenging because we're shaped very differently and we've got very different equipment.
So the first movement is all about the aggregation of the beetles.
They feed at these territories that are on the sides of trees, but those trees are healing at the same time. And so a different insect actually makes the territories. The beetles aren't able to dig for territories themselves. So it's actually bark beetles or bees or wasps that make those holes. And then the next day the tree heals. And so there's a whole different battle for a different tree the following night.
They will emit this aggregation pheromone to let other beetles know, hey, there's some chow here, and then that allows them to cluster, which then gives them an opportunity to, of course, mate. So in the first movement, there's like 3 different motives. There's this kind of idea of a calling chord taking place of the aggregation pheromones, and it's done both vertically, like as a chord, and then horizontally as like a melodic motive. There's also a munching theme, so again, it's very additive. So we start with 1 nom, and then by the end of the movement, we are saying nom, 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 nom. And then there's also this very chromatic flying motive where the beetles are swirling around and interacting with each other. The piece includes a lot of breathing and more percussive techniques. And I wanted to use a lot of those because beetles are just by nature very kind of percussive. Being able to use and incorporate some of those techniques helped bring the atmosphere, I think, of the Beatles into what could have been just like sheer melody. I wanted the audience to be transported to like the forest or nature. So you're just hearing the wind in the trees, and then you just hear like these little feetsies going. Just create more of the ambiance of what the Beatles actually sound like.
As a biologist, I am obsessed with extremes. I like studying structures that are so outlandish in proportion they look like they shouldn't be possible. This is an example of what I think everybody would consider to be a big weapon. It's an antler from a moose, and it's heavy, and it's strong, and it's a significant material investment for the animals that make these things. But actually, if you want to study really big weapons, you have to think about size in proportion to the rest of the animal. To me, this is a huge weapon. To a moose, it's probably only 2 or 3% of his body weight. I wanted to study really big weapons, and that's one of the reasons that I ended up focusing on beetles. So here you can see an example of a dynasty species of rhinoceros beetle, and the weapons are these huge pincher-like horns that come forward from the thorax and come up from the head. If you look at the size of this horn on this beetle, it's fully as long as the rest of the body of this beetle. This turns out to be about 30% of the body weight of the male. 30% of his weight is being allocated to or invested into a weapon. If you think of the biggest elk antlers you've ever seen, it's probably 5% of the body weight of the bull that carries it. These horns are 30% of the weight of the male. That would be literally like you or me walking around with a coffee table fused to the top of our heads for our entire adult lifetime. That's how extreme these traits are.
I was really interested in making some costumes that relayed just the scale of beetle armaments. We've got these horns that are basically the length of their body. So if you had a human with that proportion of weapon, what would that be like? We've kind of taken a little bit of a step back from that scale just for practical and aesthetic reasons. But it is still really interesting to think about how a creature just exists in the world with this crazy anatomy. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. This is the variety of costumes that we ended up doing. I was really loving playing with this idea of the secondary sex characteristics being extremely gaudy and very like peacocky, but also that these animals go through combat. So this kind of has like a West Side Story tinge to it, and there's a little bit more of an armor aspect to it. I think I was looking up like samurai armor, and what is more masculine than West Side Story? Really, very manly. And one could argue that what is more masculine than that is like Elvis. The courtship costume is very inspired by Elvis and kind of the nudie suits of like country stars in the 70s and 80s. We aren't exactly sure what the rhino beetle is signaling during its courtship song and dance.
The horns absolutely are a tool that they use to pry opponents off of a tree. And they definitely are a signal for the males because the rival males jab and spar and size each other up. But the females don't care about the horns. They don't pay any attention to the horns at all. In fact, the way the males are sitting on the backs of the females, we don't think the females can even tell that the horns are there. But there's other kinds of signaling going on. These males, we now realize, sing and dance. And we think that's a whole new repertoire of signaling that might be giving females information about the body condition, the size, the health, the relative vigor of a courting male.
Is it possible that it is signaling something so outrageous that it would be like a bejeweled Elvis costume piece that makes your grandmother clutch her pearls because of the gyration of its thorax? Is like, oh my gosh, that's risque. So our aggregation costumes, the part of the anatomy that I was really focused on with these was the wing covers, which are the elytra.
So if you think of something like a butterfly or a moth, there are 2 forewings and 2 hind wings, so there's 4 wings in total. If you look at something like a beetle, this is my trusty Lego model to show you, the outer covers are actually a modified pair of forewings. So what used to be presumably ancestrally a flying pair of wings has now been consolidated into a tough, leathery, protective shell. We call them the elytra, the wing covers, fold up at rest so that they act as part of the suit of armor. When they want to fly, they pull those wing covers to the side, and then the actual wings, which I'm showing here with the Legos, much more delicate, papery, fibrous wings unfold, and then those are the wings that they actually flap with to fly.
So a little bit of a nod to the fact that those flying wings are often covered, and whenever the beetle is just hanging out or on a tree, covered. And then they open up and they're beautiful wings. For a lot of these costumes, I really leaned into gaudiness. It was always going to be ridiculous to have humans dressed up as beetles dancing, so why not go there? So these are kind of the core dancer costumes. We were able to add, again, that wing cover and the wings coming out. And then there's this really beautiful kind of already made segmentation that's going in. This was the only female head that I made. All of the rest of the headpieces have the iconic pitchforky spike. When I was prototyping a few years ago, they were these really ridiculously large cardboard pieces that were extremely ungainly to move in. And so they kind of got scaled down, but this is the pinch point that you would have if you were a beetle to grasp your opponent. Getting an organic branching shape was really difficult. Hats off to the beetles who do this every time. I just really love the shape of bifurcating systems. I think they're fantastic. There is some variety in the shapes. There would be no point in competition and selection if everything was identical. Yep, I think that's all I have to say. Maybe.
Clearly, weapons are things that you jab with, you twist, you pry, you stab, you use them in battle. So you can actually see here puncture holes on this antler that probably resulted from the tines of another bull when they fought. And there's fun questions about why does a moose antler look like this and why is it different from an elk antler? And part of the answer to that question has to do with the biomechanics of how they fight. But the other part of it, we think, has to do with another use of these structures, which is as a signal. I mean, that's a pretty big, obvious signal. And if you ever watch these guys, they size each other up right away. The bulls are sort of face to face, and they dip their heads and they run side by side. They're checking out whose weapons are bigger. And if you look at animal contests in the wild, most of them get settled without actually fighting. So deer spar, and caribou will lock their antlers and push a little bit. His antlers are bigger, I'm out of here. Very few fights actually escalate into a really dangerous sort of knockdown, drag out battle. And the reason is because these things make good signals. Those things are heavy. That's part of why they're a good signal. We see that kind of signaling in rhinoceros beetles. They jab, they poke each other, they sweep and see if they can hit each other. If I can touch you with my horn and you can't touch me, you've got it figured out. My horn is bigger than your horn. So beetles also use the horns as a signal.
So it's got one head weapon up here and then one weapon on the pronotum, one little clip. And those two pieces together create this kind of lever action, which it uses to fling other competitor males off of the site during fighting sequences before courtship.
I've also been really interested in using momentum and gravity to kind of unseat your opponent. How do you use momentum and leverage to pry a person or a beetle away from your beloved?
The second movement, that's our battle movement. So I basically made a March Madness bracket of the different instruments, and they battle each other for supremacy, so to speak. Just like in general, in nature, the instrument that is the largest and the loudest is probably going to win.
The fact that we have an example of an animal that has really big weaponry and also very elaborate, very conspicuous courtship, that's very counterintuitive, you would think, from like an evolutionary biology perspective. So that is a really cool question in its own right that I'm very interested in.
There's some kinds of animals where the males perform elaborate courtship displays. They could be singing complicated songs, they could have elaborate tail plumes that they display to the females, dances, bright colors, things that the males are doing to sort of advertise their status, their quality, their size, and the females actively choose from among those different males. And we tend to call them female choice mating systems because a lot of the biology and a lot of the success or failure of the males in the system is directly determined by the behavior of the female. Which display did she like best? That one, that's the male that mates. So the beetles that we study exemplify a different kind of mating system, a type of mating system that is usually thought to be driven by battles between rival males rather than elaborate courtship displays and sort of active choice by females. There's a critical resource. It's a wound on the side of a tree that provides the food that the female beetles need. There aren't very many of these feeding sites. And what that means is it creates an opportunity for battle or for competition. When we started looking at the rhinoceros beetles, we weren't expecting there to be any female choice. They have huge weapons. The weapons are among the largest of any weapons of any living species. And they go and they fight over localized feeding sites exactly the way the textbooks and the theory predict that they should. It's a male-male competition mating system, so nobody was looking for active female choice because it's not a mating system where we would have expected there to be sort of over-active female choice. But that's why biology is so wonderful, because it always catches you by surprise. And in this case, it was students out in the field and our colleagues in Japan in the field watching these beetles closely at night. They noticed that the females come in and they feed, and then they often reject the dominant male. He just fought 26 battles. He's the biggest beetle. He's got the biggest horns. He's on the territory. And the females reject him and won't let him mate. And when that happens, The male climbs on the back of the female and he starts to sing.
Rhino beetles have three types of songs. There's the A song, which is made by a vertical movement, a B song, which is a horizontal movement, which is used to communicate with the females, and then there's the C song, which combines both of these movements into a sort of figure eight, and that is just used during the courtship. So there's an additive effect of these two songs, which I used a lot in creating the piece.
So they're moving their heads up and down at the same time that they are shaking their abdomens back and forth. Tremulation is kind of the fancy term. And they just have this giant horn on the top that amplifies that movement. So it just looks way more dramatic since they have their weapon. If they're eating regularly, they move really fast. They can contract their muscles really fast, and that gives them a really fast song. If you limit that diet, instantly drop off, much slower song, and that could have really direct effects on whether or not they'll be able to mate. And I think that it's actually a much more complicated interaction with what's happening with the female. So if the female is also eating a lot and she's also in really good condition, those things may be a more limiting factor than whatever the male can do with song, but the song might be a tool to overcome some of those barriers.
The third movement is all about the courtship of the male. The winning male gets to woo the female, and so there's this lovely, long love song melody. The last portion of the piece, the instruments actually are arranged in a very specific order, and they pass this note back and forth, side to side, in different rhythms and lengths to create kind of like this horizontal movement type effect of going from side to side.
When I got to the field and was able to actually observe these animals in their natural setting, I was blown away by how much more complex their mating system actually is. I think just bug sex in general is hilarious. And the more that I learn about it, it just like blows my mind how crazy it is. There's more behavioral and genomic variation in insect mating systems than all other animal mating systems combined. Animal behavior in general is a field that has a tendency to be really impacted by what's happening in human societies. It's very easy to ascribe gender roles when you're talking about male and female interactions. And I think where you see more diversity in the scientists performing research, you're getting more diverse and surprising research in science. So I think there's a very cool trend of trying to expand mating systems to go beyond what we traditionally ascribe them as. One of those moments actually came when I was recording on my phone 2 female rhinoceros beetles also fighting in a very similar manner that male rhinoceros beetles fight, except they don't have horns. And I showed it to a person we ended up working a lot with while we were there, who runs this really cool education program for kids. He's in his 70s and he loves these animals. And I showed him this video and he said never in his life has he ever seen the females fight before. And it really took it as a moment of like, maybe it's not that you hadn't seen it, but maybe you just didn't notice it before. They're just like a million directions that I think people still haven't explored that are all happening simultaneously to shape evolution.
The arts and sciences have a lot of shared qualities. Artists and scientists are researchers. They're insatiably curious about the world around them. They are in pursuit of something, and each discipline has limitations, parameters, constraints, but they're ruled by different governing thoughts. And so the arts and sciences are complements to one another and can enrich and expand how we think about different topics.
ideologically, there's a platform for science to develop into art. And so the culmination of those things, you come up with a piece that's stronger than any of its individual parts.
When you take scientific data and you just translate it to music or really any art form, it really broadens the access points where people can get excited about it. That is kind of the big point of my music, is I want people to get excited about the natural world, even if it's something as, simple as the roots of a plant or the mating songs and dances of a beetle.
I don't think it communicates in an expository way that a scientific paper would, or like a conference presentation, but I do think that drawing inspiration from the work and showing that you can interpret and create something that's interesting and captivating really hopefully fills people with a sense of curiosity.
There is so much joy to be gleaned from becoming passionate about something. And for a lot of kids especially, that something is biology or art. For me, teaching about science and about art too is really about inspiring passion and curiosity, because I think it makes the world a better place. I know it's dramatic to say, but I believe it.
Every single thing that is alive has a different evolutionary history that made it different from the 1 million other things that are also alive. And there's so many secrets that are hiding underneath the surface of everything you're looking at. We're still finding things out about fruit flies, and they're like the most well-studied organism in the world. So doing this kind of job has given me a deeper appreciation for how complex every single living thing on this planet is.
Bugs they're weird. They're fun, they're weird. Growing up, I had a huge fear of insects, and it kind of hadn't gone away forever. And then until I really sat down and thought about it, and I'm like, why scared? Why? When I really got a chance to look at the insects and really think about them and think about the ecosystem and their place in the world, it really just opened this whole door. I'm like, whoa, how do insects interact with the world? Isn't that kind of fantastic? And they are just like weird little mammals. They're so interesting behaviorally, and even just from like an untrained, unlearned perspective, you can look at them and be like, what are they doing and why? Like, why are they doing that? It's crazy that they do that, and we don't exactly know why in a lot of cases.
These beetles are so alien in a way. Like, you take a moment to just think about how they are on the earth. Like, they're in the same earth that we're in, and that's really cool, and it's not something that we get to think about a lot. And it's not necessarily subject matter that we get to create with as artists a lot, and it's not necessarily something that we get to share with our audiences. So I really hope that people will just be excited and feel a little bit more awe about the world around them.
We study. I know you're going to use that too.